It's Super Week to Super Bowl week. Wow,
Super
it
week.
is a super week. It's Super Bowl week. Welcome into the Flight Plan Podcast. I am Tim McMaster, along with Zack Rosenblatt, who covers the Jets for the Athletic. We have a lot to get to since we've last done the podcast. The Jets have made a lot of hires, a lot of them coming from obviously the Detroit Lions organization, and Colton Pouncy, who covers the Lions for the Athletic, is going to join us in a little bit to talk about some of those guys, including Glenn and Engstrand, and the important pieces that are coming from Detroit to New York to try to do what they did there, right? Change the culture and get this team headed in the right direction. We'll also talk about the Rick Spielman edition, some of the people who are leaving the organization. And Zack also has a feature up on Mekhi Becton, who's obviously going to be playing in the Super Bowl Sunday with the Eagles. Really good story. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Zack, you are at the Super Bowl. That's why you were able to file that story on Mekhi Becton because you got to catch up with him live in person down in New Orleans. You've been there all week. So the first question is, how much coffee with chicory have you drank? And how are you feeling now that we're to Friday?
Man, I've covered one Super Bowl before. It's a lot of fun, but it's like there's so much to do, and I'm writing a lot of things. Like even as we speak right now, like I'm helping Brooks, our Eagles writer, and so I'm working on a Carson Wentz story, which is like flashing me back to when I covered them in 2018. While also, I actually have another fun thing. So on Monday, I got to go to this event where they previewed all the food they're going to be selling at the stadium on Super Bowl Sunday. It was all very good. There's just so much food. I was like overwhelmingly full, but I agreed to write about it. I just haven't had a chance to do it yet. So I'm gonna write. I'm like rank all the dishes that I ate, which is fun. I there's an alternate reality where I'm a foodie and just like go around and eat at great restaurants. I'd say like one of those food influencers on Instagram. But yeah, New Orleans is such a fun city.
Be
I'm
a food
tired.
critic in your next
Yeah.
life.
Oh yeah. I think I tell my fiance that all the time. But I'm tired. I'm eating too like the food here is amazing, but it's a lot of like fried food and food that doesn't make you feel amazing after you eat it. But it's been a lot of fun seeing a lot of athletic people. There was like this athletic event last night. I forgot to tell you about this actually. We were like partnered with somebody else, and it was like just this like little casual party thing. I'm walking in with Zack who used to cover the Colts. He's a features writer. He's like telling me something, and then I look up and I don't hear anything he's saying because I noticed that Steve Urkel is at the same party as us.
What?
Yeah. Steve Urkel is there, and then later in the party, PFT commenter was there. I guess got to meet him a little bit. He was super nice.
Close
And
friend of
Puka
Diana
Nakua was there
Rossini, right?
recently. Yeah, very close friend of Diana. Diana was there, and they were chatting each other up the whole time.
Yeah.
And Puka Nakua was there randomly at the end. But yeah, it's cool catching up with the Athletic because as we were all work remotely, so it's cool catching up with these guys. Anyway, it's a distraction. I'm curious to see what kind of celebrities I see this week because I've heard a lot of different celebrities are in town. One of my Uber drivers claimed that he saw Tom Cruise walking around. It would be cool to see Tom Cruise. I know Mission Impossible is coming out this year, so maybe he's here promoting it. But I imagine now that we're at the weekend, they're all going to be here. All the crazy Eagles fans are going to be here. It's going to get really jam packed, but it's a lot of fun. I recommend. I mean, it's expensive and all that stuff, but even if you don't go to the game, I recommend anybody just like coming out for Super Bowl week because there's just like a lot of stuff going on and it's fun. And New Orleans, for my money, is the best possible host city because everything is walkable, amazing food. Like the culture around here is great, and there's just like so much going on. So I covered the one in Miami where that was a disaster, and so I don't know. It's just a lot of fun.
Actually, not as bad as the one in Tampa, I think. I read a story, I think it was today, about will New Orleans get another Super Bowl, basically? Because like with all the newer stuff popping up in stadiums, and New Orleans isn't the biggest city in the world, and like, but there's like two sides of it. There's one, it's so good because it's walkable and the stadium's right there and all the food and all the nightlife and all this stuff. But then like the Super Bowl has become so big, has it outgrown New Orleans? But sounds like you're good with it with a New Orleans because this is only the second since 2002, which is kind of crazy to me. You're good with it being in the rotation.
Yeah, I think everybody you talk to agrees that it should be here all the time. I actually talked to Thomas Morstead on Radio Row, and I guess he still lives out here in Metairie, which is like not in the city, but because he spent so much time here, and he was like, yeah, they should host it every year here. Yeah, it's fun, but yeah, as you said, there are all these new stadiums popping up. I think it's in San Francisco next year. I feel like that's not going to be a great setup. Probably, I believe it's going to be in like LA coming up, like cities like that where it's like so spread out and there's traffic. Like that's going to be a disaster. But we'll see.
It should go
We'll
like, it should be a
give the
set
Jets
rotation.
there one
I
year
used to
and all
always say
the
this for baseball's winter meetings too. It should be like, well, San Diego was part of that. That can't be part of this anymore
yeah.
because the Chargers
Man,
moved.
I
But
wish it could.
New Orleans, Miami, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. There you go. I don't see any reason to go anywhere else for a Super Bowl. You know, like,
yeah.
I mean, they did New York one year. It was
Right.
They've talked about doing DC now when they get the new stadium. Eliminate the cold weather. It's just
I think Nashville would
big
be
cities.
a good host city too. I think Nashville would,
Yeah.
once they get their new
that
stadium,
came
I
up
feel like
too.
Nashville
Once they
would
get
be
their
good.
new renovation.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. With Main Street. You just like talking about Nashville.
I do. I love Nashville.
All right. Let's bring in Colton Pouncy. Colton, thank you for joining us, man. Obviously, the Jets are quickly becoming the Detroit Lions East. So thanks for coming on to talk about some of these new additions and how is your off season going? Obviously, I think for most of the season, a lot of us thought you'd be in New Orleans this week. So I'm sorry that you're not there, but hopefully you're enjoying the off season.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm not Steve Urkel. I apologize. I would have been, no, you wanted to meet him. Yeah, I mean, my offseason's been a little busy. Obviously, since the season ended, it feels like every coach is leaving, like left and right. I think we've kind of hit like a dry patch here. Maybe one more guy leaves. I don't know, but I think we're pretty set right now. But it's going to be a whole new staff for the Lions next year. Obviously, the Jets took a couple good ones, so yeah, it should be good to get into and good to dive into for sure.
As the Lions are having their season or like the playoffs, like did you have like any flights booked or anything like that? Like, were you planning ahead? I'm curious where your head was at with that, or were you waiting?
I usually let them tell me, like, do you want me to book for the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Do you want us to play it by ear? So I was just like not doing anything. If they wanted to tell me that, then for sure. But yeah, just kind of laying low. And honestly, like that was a shocker to see them lose to the Commanders. I know that the Lions defense was so injured, and I kind of expected them to lose to the Eagles the following week, even if they had won that game. But to kind of lose in the manner that they did was kind of surprising. It felt like maybe, and this is going to be funny to talk about right now, but I thought there were some coaching mistakes in that game. Whereas, like, I think they would have had enough to win if they were kind of sticking to like what got them here all year, kind of deviated from some things. But they end up losing. And shout out to the Commanders. I mean, they had a phenomenal run this year, and that was fun to watch too.
Yeah, I'm curious when you went into the offseason, I'm guessing you probably assumed that they were going to lose both Aaron and Ben, right?
Yeah. I mean, the fact that Ben was still here after all these, he could have left either the last two off seasons. So I think a lot of us were kind of like, all right, it's got to be time now. Like, you can't turn down the NFL 3 different times like that. So
yeah,
figured he was gone, I think. And then as the season developed and we saw AG doing what he was doing with the defense when he had like 17 guys on IR, it was pretty apparent that not only was he going to get a job, but he would probably have his pick of a few jobs. I think it kind of played out that way in the end. So definitely expected both coordinators to leave by the end there for sure. I think Dan even told us that, I'm expecting both of these guys to depart, and we'll have to pick up the pieces. And that's kind of the phase they're in right now.
Yeah, it's funny. You and Tim, you can come ask him something after. But you and Colton and I have been like chatting a lot because the Jets have either been hiring a lot of Lions coaches or like they were on the verge of hiring David Blow as their quarterbacks coach in Washington. So I've just been going to Colton for insight on all these different people because it's like one after another, and he'll tell me it even goes all the way to Lance Newmark. I had to get insight from Colton on him before when it looked like the Jets were going to hire him. But yeah, I'm curious. Like one of the things. I mean, we'll get into like the coaching side of it, but one of the things you pointed out to Aaron, which kind of like held true, it is when he spoke to us at the press conference, was about how he can get kind of sassy with the media sometimes because he like knew the Aaron Rodgers questions were coming, and he was like prepared for it. And then as he kept getting pestered with it, is when he brought out that sass you brought about. So I was like kind of anticipating it. So I think it's going to be fun. Like I kind of like a back and forth with a coach in press conferences. I think that'll probably happen a decent amount in New York when he's the head coach too, especially when they're losing or questioning a decision of his or why isn't a guy playing and stuff like that. But like, what was the experience like covering Aaron Glenn as a media member? Would you say?
He was one of my favorite coaches to cover. I'll say that. And like the funny thing about AG is like I feel like he's at his sassiest when like his teams are playing well. Like he's one of those old school coaches who like doesn't want, like Nick Saban says, a rat poison. He's like one of those guys where like, all right, don't hype us up too much. Like we haven't done anything, And whereas if he senses, hey, we had a tough week, guys are feeling it in the media or the fan base is kind of getting on some guys, he'll go up there and defend his players. And I think that's why guys respect him so much because he can defend them. He'll give them some love when they need it, but behind closed doors, like he can always say, "Hey, man, like I need you to play better." And there's that level of respect between player and coach. So like, the sass we definitely see here. We definitely saw it here in Detroit. It was funny trying to predict like which AG we were going to get on a given Thursday morning. But he was really kept it real with everyone. Really matter of fact coach. Like doesn't really beat around the bush. And that's one of the things I respect about him. He kind of told us like it is, and I'm sure he'll be the same way with his players in New York.
I have one more on Glenn. We could probably move on to Engstrand after that. But when we talk about changing a culture, and it's a culture that's been bad for a long time in New York, and everyone that's come in has said they're going to change it. But when you think back to when Dan Campbell took over in Detroit and actually did that, and Aaron Glenn a part of that staff, how much do you think that was just the head coach, and how much was like Aaron Glenn and others a part of making the Lions what they are right now?
The Lions don't have the turnaround without Aaron Glenn. I think Dan will tell you that himself. I remember after that first year, they were 3-13-1. I think the offseason that year, AG was interviewing with some other teams for their head coaching jobs. And Dan was terrified to lose him. And he was telling us that. And, I think he said he has a quote where he's like, without AG, I feel like I'd be walking around in my underwear, something like that. Just as he was kind of getting that thing started early on, like that was his right hand man, and he would lean on him for everything. And it was funny because, like, AG was sort of inexperienced too. Like that was his first chance at a DC job. Obviously, they were together in New Orleans, but they had a vision for where they wanted to take this thing. And AG was one of Dan's first hire, if not his first hire, in Detroit. And so that kind of spoke to like their relationship. They're both Texas A&M Aggies. They're both from the Parcells tree, from the Sean Payton tree. They kind of speak the same language and they see the game the same way and they want the same type of players. And really how it worked in Detroit from the front office on down, there's so much alignment from, front office with Brad Holmes to Dan Campbell to AG and his assistants, all the way on down. They had a certain vision for how they wanted this thing to look. They weren't going to cut corners early. A lot of people linked them to like high price free agents. Maybe a quarterback in that first draft, and they end up taking up Penei Sewell. So they were going to build this thing the right way with players that compete, don't mind competition, are going to work hard and maximize everything they got, and ultimately try to play for the guy next to them. That's really what one of the core foundations out here in Detroit is, just paying for the guy next to you. And AG had a big part of that. Dan is a leader of men type himself, but AG time and time again would stand up in front of that room, have every guy's attention, every guy locked in on him. And that's a rare thing. That's a valuable trait as a head coach. I know everyone's looking for that X's and O's guy, the flashy offensive coordinator, but I think we're going back to this maybe throwback era of football where like these guys matter. You see a Dan Campbell, a Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh, like these leader of men that can, withstand a loss of a good coordinator, good coaches and players. They're the constant. And I think AG kind of fits that mold if, they kind of give him the time to succeed out there in New York.
Yeah, the thing I've been saying about why I think he's such a good fit for the Jets is that, especially this last season, you mentioned a little bit like all the injuries they were dealing with, and they didn't really miss a beat until that Commanders game, but they didn't really miss a beat at all. Whereas you look at the Jets over these last few years, and as soon as adversity struck or you lost somebody important, it's like they fell apart. So at the very least, I feel like it's safe to say he won't let that happen. Like how in terms of like actually coaching it up and being able to have the defense playing at the level it was how like clever or creative was he in terms of the play calling? Was that, because I imagine that was a big part of it, because he had them playing hard and stuff, but you have to overcome your personnel issues. And so I imagine he did a really good job in terms of like putting those guys in position, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll touch on that in a sec, but it really starts with mindset. They're bringing guys off the street like Jamal Adams, Quan Alexander, and it's like, yeah, these guys maybe aren't valued elsewhere, but it's like if you can come here and help us for a week or two and give it all you got, and maybe we'll see if we have a place for you. But the prerequisite to get on the field is to compete and play hard. And if you can do that, they'll try to put you in positions to succeed. So that was first and foremost when they were kind of, taping things together along the way. But in terms of what AG wants to do as a defensive mind, it was really all about playing man coverage, blitzing at a high rate. And that's something that he really didn't have his first 3 years in Detroit. So if you look at some of the defensive numbers, they're not going to look great because they never really had the personnel to run his preferred defense. So it's having, press man corners on the outside, nasty defensive line. In terms of his edge rushers, he likes sort of the big pocket crushers more so than maybe some of the speed guys out there. And the Lions really had that this year. And like you could see it in training camp, and you're like, man, this is coming together. This is looking nice. Especially the year Aiden Hutchinson was having before he went down. Like it really felt like they had turned a corner, and that defense was going to maybe match the offensive level after all these years. And so even when some guys went down, I really credit AG for keeping the mindset in place. Like, I don't care who's out there. I don't care if it's my grandma out there. We want that same type of effort every single play. Otherwise, you're not going to be on the field. And that's really how they operated for much of the season. Things kind of fell apart when they lose Aleem McNeil, Carlton Davis in that Bills game, week 15. That was kind of the turning point. It's like, man, we got half of our defense on IR. We're throwing out practice squad guys. This is really tough. And we'll see if we can piece together. Maybe the offense is going to get us there, but didn't work out in the end. But I would not blame that on AG. I think he did a wonderful job with what he was given and kind of how the year went.
Yeah. When you hire a coach that isn't an offensive coach, obviously the most important is offensive coordinator. I'm like Tanner Engstrand. I feel like not many people outside of Detroit knew a lot about him until now. I think Jets fans have studied up on him, and I've asked around about him. Gotten some pretty positive reviews. But like, what can you say about him and like the perception of him among that staff and around that team and stuff like that? Because it sounds like they're all pretty high in him, but at the same time, I think Jets fans see, okay, Ben Johnson didn't bring him, and they picked John Morton over him. So they're like, why did that happen too? Like, so what can you tell us about Tanner and all the context there?
One of the funny things about Tanner is like if you Google his name looking for a photo, like there's a photo that's not of him. That's one of the main photos.
Yeah, I saw one of the national guys like used a photo that wasn't him. I forget which one. When they were
all offseason, multiple people have done that. So someone messed up in the AP wire, I guess. But that kind of speaks to like, he's sort of an unknown, right? Like nobody can really tell him apart. He's kind of been in the background a little bit, but in terms of, his impact here in Detroit, he got here in 2020 before Dan Campbell. He was retained by him. He comes from maybe the Jim Harbaugh tree, if you want to say that, more of a West Coast style. And so in 2022, when Ben Johnson was promoted to offensive coordinator, he was formerly tight ends coach. Tanner Engstrand took over as tight ends coach here in Detroit, did that for a year. The following season, they brought in Steve Heiden, who we can get to in a second, to take over as tight ends coach. And it was a move that the Lions made to make him, he was already passing game coordinator, but they took away tight ends coach from his position. And I think that was just to kind of free him up to work closer with Ben, really focus on that side and that craft, and kind of see where he can go with it. And you talk to Dan Campbell, he's mentioned like we see him growing as a coach. He's more involved with game planning. He's helping out Ben. He's exactly where we need him to be. And so that kind of set off some alarms for some of us where it's like, okay, maybe they're making this move to make him the eventual successor to Ben Johnson whenever he does leave, which we knew he would at some point.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny. It worked out this way. They end up bringing in former Jets OC John Morton to be their OC. Yeah. Tanner goes out there to the Jets. So I think in the end, if I had to guess, and this is just, I haven't really talked to too many people, but they lost Aaron Glenn, obviously. So it's like they replaced him with Kelvin Shepard, a first-time coordinator. If you were to replace Ben Johnson with Tanner, that's 2 first-time coordinators in those roles. In a season where you expect to be, Super Bowl contender. I know people maybe expect them to take a step back, but internally they're still like, we have the talent to be a Super Bowl contender. Let's try to keep this going. So maybe you bring in the offensive veteran and John Morton, and then the young guy and Kelvin Shepard. And obviously, I think at that point, maybe Tanner tries to stay, but if he has an opportunity to go be an OC and call plays, I mean, that's hard to pass up too. So I think he made the best move for him, and excited to see what he can do in New York. So I think he's earned the opportunity, and he's kind of put in the work to get there.
Yeah, definitely. And then we can touch on Heiden a little bit too. I think that one was out of left field. Like I guess there has been more. Some people have pointed this out since. There's been more than I realized, like tight ends coaches who became offensive line coaches. Actually, I think I forget the names, but Keith Carter's one of them. Which Jets fans don't want to mention, but there are some other coaches that were. So what's I mean, I know position coaches, you don't really get to spend that much time with them, but like, what's your impression of Heiden, and what was your reaction when you saw that he was getting this job as opposed to like tight ends coach or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a bit of a surprise, but I mean, there is
Yeah.
some crossover between those positions, and
Yeah.
obviously the Lions ask their tight ends to block quite a bit in their offense with all the different stuff they do in the run game. So really, you have to know pretty much everything you're doing in offense. You're going to play for these guys out here as a tight end. So that means you have to teach all that stuff. So I think Heiden knows all the run game concepts that they were doing here in Detroit. I think he can take some of those to New York, especially working with Tanner. I think that's going to be a pretty good pairing. Just having two guys like that. And offensive line coach is a very important position on any staff.
Yeah.
It's really one of the most coveted ones. So obviously, as a guy that's had some experience, but not a full-time job in the NFL, I don't believe. There's maybe some concerns with that, but I think again he's had experience in this role for a little bit. What he's done with the tight ends, I think, makes a lot of sense to kind of bring that over, and just a guy that knows the terminology that you want to run offensively. I think that will end up being a good fit. And this is a guy that played in the league. I think he came to the league the same time as Dan Campbell, so those two knew each other, and that's kind of where that connection came from. Got into coaching pretty quickly after his career ended, so he's a smart guy. Kind of matter of fact, more low key than AG for sure. Kind of keeps to himself, but should be a good fit over there with Tanner.
All right, Colton, we really appreciate you taking some time. I know you're going to be off for a little bit, so enjoy a break and enjoy the Super Bowl this Sunday. I kind of wish you guys were there as well. I think probably a lot of people that are Jets fans would rather, I don't know, not see the Eagles in the Super Bowl again. So, but unfortunately, here we go. But thanks for coming on, talking about all these former Lions coaches, and have a good off season.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Colton.
All right, that was Colton Pouncy. Great stuff on AG. Obviously, he's a big fan of everything that Aaron Glenn did in Detroit, and it was kind of cool listening to him say, like, yeah, they don't turn it around with Dan Campbell, but not Aaron Glenn.
Yeah, for sure. It was funny. You're just saying that we wish the Lions were in the Super Bowl. I was just thinking, if that had happened,
doesn't everybody?
Then the Jets wouldn't have hired. Yes, but the Jets wouldn't have hired Aaron Glenn yet. Like, we'd still be sitting here not knowing who the Jets coach was going to be. Like, think about that.
That's true.
Like, that would. I mean, I would have been out here, and my entire assignment would have been just covering Aaron Glenn, which would have been fine. But like, it just would have.
You would imagine, though, it would have been that situation where he would have been hired on Monday, right?
Yeah, like Kellen Moore probably will be by the Saints.
Yeah.
It's been funny because, well, the Kellen Moore one is funny, just not to sidetrack too much, but he's in the city that he's probably going to become the coach in. So he's like in the facility and at the stadium that's going to be a stadium. He's been asked about that. Larry Holder, who works for us, asked him, like, so did you hire a real estate agent yet? And he just like,
have you seen apartments this week?
Yeah. It's just so fun. I think that happened, I think with Jonathan Gannon in Arizona, maybe a couple years ago. I think like it was in the host city that he was becoming the coach of. But anyway, yeah, I thought that was funny. But yeah, Colton does an amazing job on the Lions, and that was great insight for sure.
All right, let's get into some of the non-Lions hires. Nice. Defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. Obviously, I think the thing that stands out here, right, and people have talked about it, is the fact that this is a guy that has been a head coach. You have a head coach who hasn't been a head coach. And you have an offensive coordinator who hasn't even been an offensive coordinator. So it does seem important in one of those coordinator jobs to have somebody who has been at the highest level of coaching, just to be that extra ear and that extra level of experience. Yeah,
I think that was maybe the OC was the most important in terms of like what it means for how they're going to run their team and stuff like that. But I think Wilks was the most important in terms of they needed somebody like that on the staff. Aaron is not going to call plays on defense. He said that at his press conference. And so you have somebody in Steve Wilks who I think you can trust as the play caller. No, he's had like some real ups and downs as a defensive coordinator in the NFL. His time with the 49ers, he was fired because his scheme didn't really fit with Shanahan's. But if you look at the numbers, they were like top 10 and everything. And it got worse after he left. And that's the reason why Saleh is back there now. And in Carolina, he did some good stuff over the years. He was the head coach of the Cardinals. It didn't go that well. I think he had a stop in like Cleveland where it didn't go that well. But I think he's a veteran defensive coordinator who I trust to call plays, and he's a good leader. Like there's a lot of like quotes from him out there about accountability and, you know, the importance of like truth tellers on your staff, and not only staff, but like he has like a thing about buddy and friend. Like you don't want a buddy on your team because a buddy's not going to like tell you the truth, whereas like a friend is going to tell you the truth, and that's like his whole thing. And so the Jets need that kind of energy in the building. And so I think, you know, on a staff that is full of a lot of people that are doing their jobs for the first time, it's important that they have him on there for sure. Like I know there's some other hires that I think some fans are either upset about or excited about, but I think he was an important one, having a head coach on the staff. Like especially for an inexperienced head coach like Aaron Glenn, like that's a big deal for sure.
Any other coaching hires you want to just get into? I mean, Banjo, obviously,
I can run.
I don't know how. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can run through a few real quick. Yeah, Banjo, everything. I mean, I didn't include all. Oh, yeah, we're gonna play a Sean Payton clip actually about Aaron Glenn. I talked to him about Banjo too. I'm saving that for like a story I'm gonna do on Banjo down the line. But like one of the first lines out of Sean Payton's mouth to me was like, "Remember this conversation. Chris Banjo is going to be a head coach." Like he declared that to me. I mean, he hired him right after his playing career ended. And immediately hired him as assistant special teams coach. He's highly regarded in Denver. Thomas Morstead raved about him when I talked to him. So he's someone to be excited about. I think he has he's 28 years old, which is just absolutely insane. But I think he's going to be a really, really good coach. The quarterback's coach is the one everybody's kind of had a little consternation about, Charles London. He's kind of bounced around the last few years. He's a former running back and running backs coach, and QB coach is an important position. And they were trying to get David Blow, who's viewed as a rising star. Washington declined the request. So that's one that, you know, we'll see how it plays out. And if they have a young quarterback, how concerned should you be? Brought back Sean Jefferson. He was the only coach they retained, wide receivers coach. I think Garrett Wilson and him have a good relationship, which maybe played a factor. He was one of the better position coaches they had. Aaron Curry, linebackers coach. He was really good in Pittsburgh. I've heard a lot of really good things about him. And Chris Harris from the Titans is going to be the defensive passing game coordinator and secondary coach. Like he's another one that's viewed as like a rising star in the business. So I think those are, it might be, the defensive line coach. I'm blanking on his name right now. He's a very experienced guy. He was with the Bills for a while. Eric Washington. So it's a interesting staff. I think the defensive staff has excited people more than the offensive one, but I'm actually high on Tanner Engstrand. Who knows about Steve Heiden? I get the stuff about Charles London. We don't know publicly who their running backs coach is yet, I don't believe, but I think it's a solid staff he's put together. Like maybe it's not the most exciting in some spots, but I think he did a pretty good job with it.
You mentioned the Sean Payton interview. We should get to that before we move on to the front office. Yeah. So let's do that here real quick.
I'm thrilled for Aaron. I spoke to him the night after he got back from the Jets interview, really a couple hours before he took the job the next day. And then the same with Chris Banjo. There's an it factor that it's like seeing it in a young player, kind of, you know, seeing where they can be. And I just think that there's not only a work ethic, but a presence in front of the room, and then also a confidence level that they're going to, you know, man, I'm telling you what, if it doesn't work with Aaron Glenn, he's going to die trying.
Yeah,
and he's going to have obstacles. There's going to be, you know, we've got to work through some of these things. Bill said you got 3 years, you know, you got to make an impression early, and I think that would help him with the ownership group and who he's working with. And
so there you go. He did mention Banjo in there a little bit, but yeah, good things from Sean Payton, who's obviously
before we go on. I just said we don't know the running backs coach. Yes, I guess this news came out like a little bit ago who they hired. University of Minnesota's Nick McKissick-Luke is their running backs coach. I don't know anything about him. I will look into him. It says he coached Darius Taylor, who rushed for 10 touchdowns this past season, but dug into the college ranks for running backs coach. They're pretty talented at running back. So I wouldn't say it's not an important position, but these guys are already pretty talented. You hope he can help take Breece Hall and Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis to the next level. But there you go. I believe the coaching staff is pretty much filled out at this point, unless I'm thinking of a position that they don't have. But yeah, I think it's pretty filled out. So
Still some filling out to do in the front office. Rick
Yeah.
Spielman is the new senior football advisor, former general manager of the Vikings. He was part of the staff here with the Jets that did the hiring of Darren Muji and went through that whole process, and apparently impressed Woody enough that they decided to keep him on. But what exactly, from what you've heard, is this role? Like, what will he be doing?
Yeah, well, so he had like a podcast that he was doing CBS Sports, and he did like a final one, and he kind of explained it a little bit. He sounds like his main task is number one being a sounding board for Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn. I believe he's going to be working remotely, which is interesting. So he's not going to like actually be in Jersey. I'm sure he'll come sometimes. I think he'll be at the combine and like league events with them and stuff. But I think his big task is revamping their football ops department, which is a huge deal. And I think that's why, like, when I tweeted that they hired him, there was as much of a positive reaction to that as anything this team has done in a long time. That's like my genuine feeling, because I don't think everybody was completely sold on Aaron Glenn. Even the harshest critics of the Jets have been like, finally, they're like revamping the front office, because there's a combination of that. They fired a couple guys who have been in the front office for a long time. Greg Nejma, I don't know if I'm saying that right, and David Sochi, who was like the contracts guy. Like, those guys have been through multiple GMs. They're clearing a couple guys out. Muji started bringing some of his own people. He hired Rob Payton, the brother of George Payton from the Broncos. He was a scout over there. Like, this has been overdue, and it's a sign that Woody is listening right now. So the Spielman thing is highly. I mean, he's a guy that was a GM, pretty successful one. He helped the Washington Commanders hire Adam Peters and Dan Quinn, and out of between him and Tannenbaum, like, I respect Mike Tannenbaum, but I think Spielman was the one to bring into the building, and more of an outside voice than even Tannenbaum, who has been in the building before. Maybe he'll still be involved too, but I think it was a really, really, really smart, thoughtful hire, and it's a sign that hopefully, like, Colton actually kind of touched on this with the Lions, like the way they built it out in Detroit. Like, they didn't skip any steps. They like did everything they had to do. They built it from the ground up. And this is a good sign that the Jets are doing this. The Jets have often tried to skip steps. It was always results over process. And it seems like they're starting to get the process right. I still need to see it from Woody. Like, okay, this whole offseason, maybe they're doing the right things. How quickly does that change if they have a bad year? It doesn't happen during the season. If they have a bad year, does he go into the offseason and start, taking control again and getting his sons involved and all that stuff? That'll be the question that kind of hangs over this team. But the Rick Spielman thing, they deserve credit. They deserve praise. And I've given it to them. As the Discord knows, I've become the Badlands Discord. I've tried to be a positive man in the year of 2025. I've been pretty positive on the Jets so far. It is genuine. It's not just me trying to like fish for clicks or whatever. But so far I've been positive because I think their process has been good. I think the hire of Aaron Glenn was good. Muji's more of a question mark, but I think he could be a good GM, and he's off to a good start with these moves they've made. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what comes of this, but the most important thing with this stuff is that you're doing the right things. And if it doesn't work out, okay, it didn't work out, but at least we did the right things. And so I think fans should be happy about the Spielman factor, and hopefully he can overturn things, change the process in that building, how they go about their business. And it seems like he's already been meeting with Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji. And again, this kind of ties back to the Steve Wilkes thing. Darren Muji's also a first-time GM. And they don't have, I mean, Phil Savage, I think, is sticking around as a advisor or consultant, which is good. And Rick Spielman has been a GM in the NFL. And so Muji has some people he can lean on for advice, for help. And that's, I think, again, not to keep saying it, but they're doing all the right things right now. And the Jets haven't always done that. So they deserve credit for it.
All right, one last thing to touch on. We can give Super Bowl predictions as well. But Mekhi Becton playing in the Super Bowl. Great story out on The Athletic. Check it out if you haven't. Written by Zack. It gets into everything that went wrong with Becton here in New York, and also what the Eagles have done to kind of like just get him going and reignite his career. One thing is luck, right? Like, he stayed healthy.
Yeah.
Which is something he couldn't do here in New York. But the biggest thing that I took from the story, Zack, was that Mekhi Becton is a human being who thrives more on positive reinforcement and love than he does on criticism and tough love. And it seemed like the Jets, at least after Adam Gase left, the Jets went with the tough love approach, and it really turned him off. Whereas the Eagles, it's all been about positives and all that stuff, and it's been a success. Is that a failure on the Jets to not understand a player, or is it a failure on the player to not be able to get in line with the coaching staff?
Yeah, one of the main things I wanted to do with that story that I wrote was kind of explain the why. Like I think a lot of times it's easy to be like, LOL Jets, guy leaves, plays well, let's make fun of the Jets. But we talked about Mekhi Becton for a long time on this podcast, both in the positive and the negative, more often the negative, because he had a hand in why it went wrong in New York. Like, absolutely. I think there was times where he lacked motivation, or he lacked discipline or maturity. He was young. He was a COVID draft pick, and, different coaching staff that he wound up playing for than the one that drafted him, and all the injuries he dealt with, and all the fluctuations in weight, and the way the coaches talked about him. And he butted heads with the coaching staff, which is on him and them. But on the flip side, like what you've seen with the Eagles and Jeff Stoutland, I mean, could he have had the season with anybody other than Jeff Stoutland? I don't know. Like, it was just like the perfect landing spot for him. Not only Jeff Stoutland, but Lane Johnson is there. And you have this veteran group, this veteran locker room, this coaching staff that coaches like the way you were saying. And so it was a perfect fit ultimately. But, he's playing right guard for them. And 2 years ago, he said, I am a left tackle. And he's claimed that he only never played guard for the Jets because they never asked him to. But if the Jets had asked him to play guard, he would not have done it. So, the story's gotten out of whack. Like, he absolutely deserves credit. And that I wasn't trying to detract from the moment, because he has played well for them and they love him in that. Like, I had talked to a bunch of Eagles, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, guys on the defense, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith actually had my favorite quote about Mekhi, because he's like, I didn't know any of his background until I saw him crying when we clinched the playoffs. And it made me realize that I shouldn't take this for granted. Like the fact that the Eagles are expected to win, they're expected to go to the Super Bowl, they're expected to go to the playoffs. They do every year. And some people have never been to the playoffs and will never go to the Super Bowl. And so, like, Mekhi has literally like opened people's eyes in Philly, because, it's like the expectation, whereas the Jets haven't made the playoffs in 14 years, and they didn't really get close with Mekhi in the building. And so, yeah, so that part has been cool. Like, he really found his place in this building. I'm very curious to see what the future holds for him. And if another team throws a lot of money at him, will he revert back to all his bad habits in New York? Or will he return to Philly, where he's very comfortable? I mean, it's insane that he's a 6'8" dude, 370 pounds, playing right guard. Like, that's just like a sight to see.
Well, it's the biggest offensive line in Super Bowl history, I think, right?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you look at
saw that.
Jordan Mailata is like 6'8". Yeah. So, I mean, good for him. Like, he deserves to be happy. I know he gets shit from Jets fans still to this day, but he's having a moment, and it's cool. So I think both, like I said, both sides had fault in how it went wrong in New York. The Jets definitely could have handled themselves much better with him, the way they talked about him, the way they coached him, all that stuff. Keith Carter and him definitely butted heads, but I don't think he was the only one that didn't like Keith Carter. He also butted heads with John Benton before that. I don't know that everybody disliked John Benton or not. Like, but those guys were more like the old school hard-nosed coaches, and the whole thing. And I think you'll see this with like Aaron Glenn too, in terms of like coaching. Like, the best coaches don't coach everybody the same way. You individualize it, especially in modern NFL. Like, it's like the days of the Bill Parcells coaching is just, and Bill Belichick even, like, he fell off towards the end. Like, coaching everybody the same doesn't necessarily work the best. If you want to get the most out of somebody, you have to factor in the way you coach them and who they are and how they respond to hard coaching and how they respond to love and all that stuff. Like, some people prefer to be hard coached and yelled at and, pointed out when they mess up or whatever it is. And some people need to be coached with a little more care and love. And I think Mekhi is clearly the latter, is what I would say.
Yeah. And it sounded like him and Sirianni have kind of formed a bond as well. All right. Really good story. Check that one out. Obviously all Zack's stories are great. No, Super Bowl
Thank you.
prediction time. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go
Since
first.
you're there.
Yeah, and I've had to answer this question a bunch on like Radio Row. I've settled
It's
on the
Chiefs
Eagles
by
winning this
1.5,
game.
I believe, right now, right? Chiefs 1.5.
Oh, is that the line? Yeah, I
so.
think it's going to be. I think it's going to be an awesome game. Some people have started to go towards. I think the Eagles are going to blow them out. I don't see that happening. I do think the Eagles are very clearly, to me, more talented across the board. But the Chiefs obviously have the advantage in the two most important areas: coach, quarterback. Like it's not even a debate or a question. They have the two best. That might go down as two of the best to ever do it if they aren't already there. Clutch. They step their game up in the playoffs, like you've seen it. Patrick Mahomes kind of coast along in the regular season. They win 15 games casually while he doesn't have an amazing season, and then he just turns it on in the playoffs. And so it's hard to bet against the Chiefs, but I just think the Eagles have something about them that they did in 2017. Only this is a better roster. Saquon's story is just awesome. They have all these guys. That defense is playing like amazingly right now. And so what I've been saying, I believe the prediction I made was 24-23 Eagles, like a 1-point game. Stressful for me as a writer who's going to have to write about it. And I mean, Zack Kiefer's the one who's going to be doing a game story at the gun. He's already stressing about it because if it's a close game, he has to have a scenario ready for them winning and a
To
scenario
write
for them
two
losing.
stories basically throughout the game.
But also like that could change if like the game ends on a last second touchdown or a blocked field goal. Like he has to like factor that into his lead. So like that's like inside baseball sports writing stuff. But writing a story at the gun, which is when the game ends, and having to have a story ready to go right away to publish, it is very stressful, but it's also exhilarating. It's an adrenaline rush. I don't really have to do it as much these days because we don't have to do gun stories at the Athletic generally. For the Super Bowl we are,
Right.
but anyway, so I think it's going to be a really, really fun, good game. I hope it is. A lot of times these games get all the hype and then it's kind of disappointing. I think it's going to be a really, really good one.
Yeah, I think it'll be good too. It'll be interesting to see. Well, the ratings are always big. I always say that, and then it doesn't matter for the Super Bowl, but I'm sure there'll be a huge crowd. I'm going to go Chiefs. I agree with you. The Eagles are the better, more talented team, but these Chiefs they just keep winning. So I'm going to say Chiefs 27-20.
Okay.
I think the over under is 48.5. So that's like right up against the over under.
Yeah, there you go. Which Vegas usually is right on the money with that stuff. So
yeah, and yours was too, right? 24-23. So
yeah, who do you think is going to win MVP then?
Mahomes.
Yeah. And I guess I'd say Saquon. Honestly, if the Eagles win, I think it'll be Saquon.
What? Yeah, that's so rare, right? For a running back to win Super Bowl MVP.
I mean, what happens with the Eagles often is,
but I can't see Hurts winning MVP. So.
Yeah, what happens is Hurts always steals his touchdown, so maybe that'll hurt Saquon's chances, or maybe like a defensive player has an amazing play or something. But
but Saquon's gonna.
It's just Saquon. He also has. There's like the storyline, like people buy into storylines, so
people are gonna want to vote for Saquon. Yeah,
exactly, and he deserves it. Like he's a great steward of the NFL. Like he's a high character guy, and he's been the story of the NFL season, frankly. So I think it'll be his moment if they win, and it'll be cool for me because I'm helping on the Eagles coverage. Like I said, I covered the Super Bowl in 2020. I can't remember I think I maybe went into the Chiefs. No, I went to like the press conferences, so I didn't even go into the locker room for the celebration. So like it'd be cool if the Eagles win because I'd like to see a celebration in the locker room because that always looks so cool, and just like being there for that and rubbing it into all my family and friends' faces, running it all to my family and friends' faces who are all Eagles fans. Will be cool. I mean, they'll all be drunk on Broad Street probably, but yeah. So I don't know. I'm looking forward to covering the game. This week has been hectic and stressful, but I'm very, very excited to be at this game, especially because it's going to be loud. That stadium gets really, really loud. Eagles fans are going to load up. I'm sure a lot of Chiefs fans will be here too. So I think it's going to be a fun one. I hope it is.
All right. Well, everybody enjoy the game, enjoy the commercials, enjoy everything that is the Super Bowl. And we'll be back at some point next week to put a bow on that, put a bow on our picks pool and decide who the winner is. And off we go into the off season. We'll start looking ahead to the draft. Thanks for tuning in to the Flight Plan Podcast.